The date was September 25, 1066. Under a surprisingly hot late summer sun in Yorkshire, England, the Viking Age was about to reach its bloody, screaming conclusion. Along the banks of the Derwent River, at a small crossing known as Stamford Bridge, 9,000 Norse warriors were relaxing in the heat. They had already won a major battle at Fulford Gate just days before. They believed the English resistance was broken. They were so confident that they had left their heavy chainmail shirts and their extra weapons miles away at their ships. They were lounging in their tunics, enjoying the breeze, and waiting for the English to come and hand over hostages. But on the horizon, a flash of light caught the eye of a Viking scout. Then another. Then a blinding, shimmering wall of steel. It was not a group of peaceful hostages. It was the entire English army. 15,000 strong, led by King Harold Godwinson. They had marched 190 miles in just 4 days, a feat of movement that was thought to be impossible. The Vikings were caught in the ultimate trap, unarmored, divided by a river, and facing a force nearly twice their size. But in the center of this chaos, one man stepped forward. A giant of a man whose name has been lost to time, but whose actions would become the stuff of nightmare. He was a lone Norse Berserker. With a 6-foot Dane axe in his hands and a cold rage in his heart, he stepped onto the narrow wooden planks of Stamford Bridge. He was one man. Behind him were 15,000 English soldiers desperate to reclaim their land. What happened next would go down as the most legendary single-man stand in the history of warfare. Today, we go inside the Battle of Stamford Bridge to see how one warrior held an entire kingdom at bay, and why his death marked the final sunset of the Viking era. To understand how a single human being could stop 15,000 soldiers, you have to grasp the two military systems that collided on that wooden bridge. The Viking war machine of 1066 was the product of 3 centuries of evolution. These were the descendants of the men who had raided Paris and conquered northern England. Their commander, Harold Godwinson, was the most feared warrior in the world. He was the thunderbolt of the north, a veteran of the Varangian Guard in Constantinople who had fought from the deserts of North Africa to the frozen plains of Russia. The Viking system was built on individual ferocity and the shield wall. Every Norseman was a specialist in close quarters combat. Their primary weapon was the Dane axe. This was a massive, 2-handed weapon with a 5-foot handle and a crescent-shaped blade. It was designed for one thing, to shatter shields and decapitate horses. A skilled axeman could swing this weapon with enough kinetic energy to cut a man in half from shoulder to hip. But on this day, the system had a fatal weakness. They were missing their armor. Without their iron mail, the Vikings were vulnerable to every arrow and spear. They were a glass cannon, capable of massive damage, but unable to take a hit. The English system under Harold Godwinson was a mirror image of the Norse, but with the added advantage of speed and desperation. The core of the English army were the House Carls. These were professional soldiers, highly trained and loyal to the king. Like the Vikings, they used the shield wall and the Dane axe, but they were fully armored and they were fighting on their home soil. Harold Godwinson had achieved the impossible by moving his entire force across England in record time. He had used the old Roman roads to his advantage, pushing his men to the point of collapse to achieve total tactical surprise. When the English reached Stamford Bridge, they didn't just bring an army, they brought a tidal wave of steel. They were the masters of the rapid march, and their doctrine was simple: hit the Vikings before they could recover their armor and form a unified line. The strategic situation on the morning of September 25th was a disaster for the Vikings. The Norse army was split in 2. About half the army was on the western bank of the river, while Harold Godwinson and the rest were on the eastern bank. When the English appeared, they slammed into the Vikings on the western bank before they could even draw their swords. It was a slaughter. The unarmored Vikings were cut down where they stood. The survivors scrambled toward the river, desperate to cross the narrow wooden bridge to reach the main force on the other side. But the bridge was a choke point. Only 3 or 4 men could stand abreast on its planks. If the English seized the bridge, they could flow across like water and destroy the remaining Vikings before they could organize a shield wall. The fate of the invasion depended on holding that bridge for just a few more minutes. That is when the giant stepped forward. The Norse sagas tell us of a great berserker, a man of immense stature and strength, who took his stand in the middle of the bridge. He did not hide behind a shield. He did not ask for help. He stood alone. To the English soldiers, he must have looked like a demon from another world. He was likely a member of the elite bodyguard, a man who had sworn an oath to die for his king. As the first wave of English House Carls rushed the bridge, the berserker's axe began to move. Here's what made this lone warrior so effective: the geometry of the bridge. In an open field, 15,000 men would have surrounded him in seconds. But on the bridge, the English numbers meant nothing. only 2 or 3 men could reach him at a time. The English soldiers were pushed forward by the weight of the thousands behind them, literally forced into the path of the giant's axe. The Berserker used a rhythmic, circular swing. Every time the heavy blade came down, an English soldier was shattered. Shields were split like kindling. Helmets were crushed. The Norseman was using a specialist tool at its maximum efficiency. For over an hour, the English piled up their dead at the mouth of the bridge. According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, this one man killed 40 English soldiers. The psychological impact was devastating. The English army, the victors of the morning, was being held back by a single blood-stained ghost. The English tried everything. They tried to rush him with spears, but the bridge was too narrow to get around his reach. They tried to shoot him with arrows, but his thick tunic and his constant movement made him a difficult target. The English front ranks began to hesitate. They were terrified. They were looking at a man who seemed to be immune to pain and fatigue. But while the Berserker fought, the main Viking army on the eastern bank was finally waking up. Harold Hard. Rada was frantically organizing his men. They were grabbing their shields, forming the legendary Norse shield wall, and preparing for the final stand. The lone warrior had bought them the most precious commodity in warfare: time. But the English were not just brave, they were innovative. One English soldier, seeing that the bridge could not be taken by a frontal assault, looked at the river. He found a large wooden trough or a small boat. He climbed inside and paddled underneath the bridge, hidden by the wooden supports and the smoke of the battle. He looked up through the gaps in the planks and saw the Vikings' feet. He took a long spear and thrust it upward through the floorboards with everything he had. The spear pierced the Berserker's groin, the only place not protected by his massive legs or his swinging axe. The giant let out a final agonizing roar and fell. The bridge was open. The English army poured across the Stamford Bridge like a dam breaking, but the time bought by the Berserker had been enough. On the other side of the river, the Vikings had formed an iron ring of shields. Harold Hard, Rada, standing at the center, was ready. He was over 6 feet tall and carried a massive sword. He fought like a man possessed, charging out of the shield wall to strike down English soldiers with both hands. The battle that followed was one of the most brutal in the history of the Middle Ages. It lasted all day. The Vikings, still without their armor, fought with a suicidal ferocity. But the English numbers and their heavy mail were too much. Harold Hard was finally killed by an arrow to the throat. His ally, the English traitor Tostig, was also cut down. By the time the sun began to set, the Viking army was almost completely annihilated. Of the 300 ships that had arrived to conquer England, only 24 were needed to carry the survivors home. The Viking Age, which had begun with the raid on Lindisfarne nearly 300 years before, ended in the blood-soaked mud of Stamford Bridge. The strategic implications of this battle were staggering, but not in the way Harold Godwinson had hoped. While he had won a total victory against the Vikings, he had destroyed his own army in the process. His housecarls were decimated. His men were exhausted. And while he was celebrating his victory at Stamford Bridge, a new threat was landing on the southern coast of England. William the Conqueror and his Norman knights had arrived at Pavnc. Harold had to turn his tired, battered army around and march another 250 miles south. 3 weeks later, he would meet William at the Battle of Hastings. If the English army had not been forced to fight the Vikings at Stamford Bridge, if they had not been exhausted by the march and the battle, the Norman conquest might never have happened. The lone Viking on the bridge had not just killed 40 men. He had helped drain the lifeblood of the Anglo-Saxon kingdom. What makes the stand at Stamford Bridge different from any other story is the pure, raw power of the individual. In an age where we think of battles as movements of masses, this was a moment where the course of a day was halted by a single pair of arms and a single heart. The Berserker had identified the bridge as the ultimate force multiplier. He had turned a 15,000 to 1 disadvantage into a 3 to 1 advantage by controlling the geography. He had used the fear and the confusion of his enemies as a shield. He didn't just fight for himself. He fought for an idea, an oath, and a king. The legacy of Stamford Bridge is the legacy of the end of an era. The Vikings were no longer the apex predators of the sea. The age of the individual raider was being replaced by the age of the organized state and the armored knight. But the image of that lone warrior on the bridge remains a haunting reminder of the power of the human will. He was a specialist of the old world, a man who had perfected the art of the axe to such a degree that he became a living wall. He proved that even the most overwhelming force can be stopped if you can find the right choke point and the right moment to stand your ground. The lone Viking remains a figure of mystery. We don't know his name. We don't know where he came from. We only know that for 1 hour in 1066, he was the most important man in the world. He was the thunder before the silence. He was the last stand of the North. It was the day tactical genius and individual bravery turned a bridge into a monument and a battle into a myth. If you want to see how the fall of the English at Hastings was a direct result of this bloody day in Yorkshire, watch this next video. Subscribe for more battles where brilliant and brutal strategy changed the course of history.